with me having recently returned to Overwatch after like a good 2 or 3 months of not really playing the game, it only took me about 2 hours of playing the game or so to realize the reason I had left initially. And the reason I had left is still present and is still a pretty big issue. So I thought I would make a video talking about it. First of all, if you don't know who I am like a top 500 no life. I'm top 500 all roles. And anyway, essentially what had happened was when I came back to Overwatch initially, I was queuing on one of my lower elo accounts. It's around high masters, low mid GM-ish, kind of in that area. And I had queued up for support and had quickly realized the problem with the role is still there. And the issue is, currently there's no reason to play DPS. Like at all, right? Because think about this. Supports are able to more consistently deal damage because they're consistently safer. They're in a lower risk position all the time because they're in the middle of their team, they're in the back lane. They typically have slightly longer range than some other DPS to compensate for the fact that they have to stand farther back. So things like Ana, BAP, things along those lines, Kiriko even. And what happens is a lot of these situations, it just becomes you have a tank who is really squishy and dies really often. You have DPS who don't really do all that much. And you have supports who are, a lot of the time, your main damage dealers and the people who are, using all the utility because they've got all the impactful utility, like their ultimates and their cooldowns in general, like Sleep, Nade, Suzu, Immortality, the Lamp, things like that. It's just like, it comes a point where it should become relatively obvious that the kit is overloaded, right? I don't think there should ever be a situation where the supports are more feared in 1v1 than DPS heroes. Like, when I'm playing, like, Genji or something, I genuinely have a harder time fighting support heroes than I do DPS heroes, which doesn't really make any sense to me because the hero was designed with the intention of you isolating and fighting support heroes and having the advantage in those fights. But with the current way the game is balanced, that just doesn't occur. Because you have things like the support passive, you have extremely buffed healing and damage numbers on tiny hitboxes, with typically great mobility, really impactful cooldowns, great ultimates. Like, there is so much in the favor of supports that playing the other roles is kind of pointless right now. And that doesn't even really come from the perspective of like a tank player or a DPS player. I play all the roles pretty equally, but for the most part, I'm a support main. Or at least I have been before I quit the game initially. So I came back, realized how overpowered support was. I played some DPS. I was like, this role kind of sucks. And then I played some tank. I'm like, wow, this role really sucks. Then I played support and I had fun, dude. And I will say, the Blizzard dev team, as much as I shit on them and I'm horrible to them sometimes, they've done a really good job of making support a genuinely fun role to play. All it took was for them to make them stupidly overpowered in every aspect for them to do that, because they're incapable of designing a fun to play character. And the same, applies to the new support, Ilari, or whatever her name is. She's just a DPS on steroids, essentially. Like, what's the difference between Ilari and, like, McCree? Right? Like, if you had the option, if there was no role queue and it was open queue, in what situation would anyone openly ever decide to pick McCree over Ilari? I can't think of any reason why you would, because Ilari essentially just is McCree with better cooldowns and can heal and a better ultimate and more consistent and easier to use. It's just, there's no reason to pick McCree at that point. And we already know McCree's too strong and he's overpowered simply because he's a hit scan. I know a lot of people disagree with me about the hit scans being overpowered, but I think in general they are. They're too easy to play for the value they get. So that must inherently make them too strong. And yeah, all boils back down to, like, why would you ever decide to play anything other than support? There's no reason to, because it's too strong. So I think the main problem with support right now is, let's talk about Ana for a second, because she's one of the big problems. Essentially, when you play Ana, what happens is you spend a lot of your time standing in the back of the map. And when you're standing there, you do 70 damage a shot after the nerf, and you do 70 healing a shot. So you stand at the back of the map and can infinite range someone 70 damage hit scan. No matter what range you're at, you do 70 damage and you hit someone with no damage fall off at all on a hit scan. So at that point, you become a more effective sniper hero than the sniper DPS heroes. Like, why would you pick Ashe when you can pick Ana? Because Ana does essentially the same thing, but Ana can heal and has better cooldowns and a better ultimate anyway, right? Same applies to Bap. Why would you ever pick Soldier if you could pick Baptiste? And here comes the problem, right? Where the only reason role queue genuinely exists is because they don't know how to balance support heroes. And that reigns true because every time they've ever released a support hero, they've been stupidly overpowered. Kiriko was overpowered, this Illari person's overpowered, Bap was overpowered, Ana's overpowered. Like, I think the only support who's genuinely balanced is probably Lifeweaver, and he got quite a big buff this season, so that might change, but for the most part, he seems relatively balanced so far, as well as, like, Lucio. But other than that, I don't really see any of the other supports being in line with where they should be, because, again, it all boils back to my main problem being, there's just genuinely no reason to ever, unironically, pick a DPS hero, unless you're in role queue and you're forced to, obviously. Because all the supports do exactly what the DPS do, but they do it better, and they have utility on top of that. And this is why no one takes the game seriously anymore, is because what happened was all the support players cried and cried and cried. They were dying too easily in 5v5, which is a whole other problem. 5v5 is horrible, but basically, everyone was killing supports in 5v5, and everyone was like, oh, I don't want to play support anymore, it's too hard. Even though it wasn't too hard, it's just all the Overwatch 1 support players were so shit at the game, and they couldn't stand at the back of the map and heal bot anymore, that they decided that it was more important to keep their casual player base than keep the game balanced, which is fair enough, right? So they maintain their casual audience by giga buffing all of the supports to be kind of overpowered, okay? Which then means tank and DPS are really fucked in the matchup against them because they're too strong. But that's the only way they can retain their support player base, because of how badly designed the game is and how fundamentally broken so many aspects of it are. So now we're in this situation where you have really, really overpowered supports, really, really, really weak tanks, and pretty middle of the road DPS depending on who you're talking about. Right, like Genji kind of sucks, Soldiers kind of middle of the road, and like Tracer's like kind of too strong, right? Depending on who you ask, but in general, that's usually how it goes. So the only way to maintain your support player base is to make support the strongest role in the game, which is the worst case scenario for the game. If DPS was the strongest, it could be fine because DPS takes a lot of skill expression, depending on the DPS you play. Same with tank. Tank is very difficult to play, especially in 5v5. So if it was the strongest role, then the only people doing really, really good on it would be the people who are really, really good at it, for the most part. But since support is the strongest role, and it's the easiest role, it means anyone can queue up, regardless of skill level. They can queue up onto support and do really, really well all the time, simply because the support heroes are just inherently too strong. And it's the same reason if you ever queue into like a GM top 500 game, you meet a lot of players you've never seen the name before of. Like, I was top 500 for a good 6 years, but every time I queue into top 500, I recognize one of my support players. One in every like 8 games, I get a recognizable support player. But other than that, they're just a bunch of new names who insta-lock support and abuse the fact that it's broken. And you can tell they're really bad, because if you watch the replay back, they make a ton of mistakes, their mechanics are bad, movement is bad, cooldown usage is bad, but all of that shit doesn't really matter right now, because of how overpowered the supports are in the first place, right? When you mix supports with that have a ton of utility, like let's say we're talking about like Baptiste for a second. Baptiste is a high damage hit scan hero with high healing, high burst healing, and AoE healing, a regenerative burst heal where he heals everyone, for a burst around him and himself, and immortality field, and jump boot mobility, then you get someone that's like disgustingly too strong in every aspect. Now, if he only had a couple of those things, it would even out and it would be okay. But because he has absolutely everything, that's problematic. Because now there's nothing he can't do. And considering the fact that Bap doesn't get a lot of playtime, and he's that overpowered, it really tells you the state of how stupid a lot of the other heroes are when something so clearly too strong is getting essentially no playtime because everything else is better than that, right? And that's my problem with Overwatch right now, is that unless you're playing support, you don't really have fun. Maybe in like gold you do, right? But for the most part, if you're a higher level player, like you're around GM, Masters or so, the game becomes really, really, really badly designed and really problematic for you unless you're playing those support heroes, because they're easily the strongest. And I don't really mind support being a really, really strong role. I think it's better for the game when support is a strong role and they have a bit more carry potential, because then they feel like they're doing more, right? And you get more active support players, which is good. However, if you're going to do that, you need to make them harder to play. You can't have support being the easiest role in the game and the strongest role, because at that point, it's a big reason for a lot of the rank inflation that's happening. Is I would say 90% of the time I queue up in GM/top 500, my support players are play like plats on both teams. It's just like both teams are wildly imbalanced because all 4 of the support players in the games are just awful, but they get to win so many games for free because of how strong their characters are that they have access to. So clearly, supports are causing a lot of issues in terms of ruining matchmaking quality, as well as just simply being too strong in general. So, how would we fix it? You have 2 options. You either have to make them a lot harder to play, so they get less value, just kind of like baseline value for like basically doing nothing, for doing their job, right? Or you nerf them. You cannot have them being both. You either have them easy to play and a little weaker, or you have them hard to play and strong. Either one is fine for me. I don't mind. But right now, you cannot have both, because it is breaking the game. Every game I queue up into, there's, without fail, 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 situations where I audibly groan at having to deal with support heroes. The amount of times I dash on someone as Genji, and Suzu is used, Immortality Field is used, and I'm like, okay, so there's no counterplay to these things, right? It's like, I played perfectly. I dash on him, I flick to his head, I triple headshot melee him, but it doesn't matter, they have Suzu. And it's just one of those things, it's like, it is what it is, right? There's literally nothing you can do. There's no way to predict it, nothing. It just happens. And another issue is, they keep making heroes that are designed to be good against other heroes, right? Think about Kiriko. Kiriko was only designed with the purpose of dealing with Ana and Junker Queen, right? Like, that's problematic, that you've designed a hero to deal with other heroes. Like, Brig was designed to deal with, you know, Doomfist, Genji, and like just general dive heroes. That's their purpose, and that's why they were made. And every hero that's designed with the purpose of countering a strategy, that hero becomes problematic. And that's why basically every support is problematic. At least is one of the reasons, because a lot of them are made with the purpose of dealing with specific strategies. And that's why they're annoying to play against. Bap was built to deal with high burst damage comms. Okay, Brig was built to deal with dive. Kiriko was meant to deal with debuffs, right? And those things in themselves are okay, that they deal with those things. But it's not okay that they deal with those things and do everything else, right? That's my issue, is that the supports do everything while also being stronger than everyone else and easier to play. That's my only gripe with support right now. And although I'm probably going to keep playing the game because I've been genuinely enjoying it over the last few days, it becomes pretty unbearable after you play for like a few hours and every game you're like, wow, that support's pretty overpowered. And you say that consistently. And I'm pretty sure basically every high level player around Masters plus GM top 500 can agree with me that support is far too strong, and it is genuinely one of the main reasons the game is kind of really fucking boring to play right now.